Okay, welcome to my day 3 of my Kingdom National Convention, my KNC. This is the last day that I'll be doing the KNCs. But in this KNC, I want to talk about something very specific and something that's very serious to our economy, as well as to the future of our development. And that's dealing with race specifically. I've dealt with culture and some of the various other root causes and root issues that we have within this economy. But one of the biggest things that we see is an issue of race. Race-ism. We've had race-ism throughout the fabric and the culture of this country and through the various systems through this country. And it's so interesting because there are so many people that still says racism doesn't exist. And they're actually correct that race-ism does not exist. And let me help you to understand why it doesn't exist. Regardless of the fact that it penetrates our system from day to day, it does not exist. And the reason why it doesn't exist is because race is actually what's considered to be called a social construction. So let me help you to understand our reality and what we have been living as African Americans, as Black Americans, as minorities. What we have been living is the racial construction that has been formulated by those who were superior from the foundations of our economic system, or from the foundations of our government. So in times past, when the government was created, we then, in integrating slaves into the system, they had to figure out how do you still continue to keep the slaves segregated or in a way to where they are not necessarily, we still see differences between us and them. So yes, they are free, but there's still differences between us and them. So the very things that they should have experienced, the freedoms that they should have experienced that applied to them, the liberties and the justices that have applied to them, was not applied to them because of the social construction. So the social construction of racism, social construction is nothing more than an objective reality. It has no objective reality. So it's from a standpoint of, in this reality, something can be true for this reality, but not true for the next, or true for this state, but not true for the next. So let me help you to show you to see how in this country, superiority was established and sustained by the social construction of racism within this country. So what they did was they tried to figure out, as you became free, what happened was a lot of slave owners had interracial relationships and children from slaves, hence the light color of the skin. Okay, so they had a lot of interracial marriages even going forward, and interracial children. So they had to figure out who's Black, who's white. Because if we're implementing you into the system, we want to be able to categorize you so that we can control you. We want to be able to categorize you so that we can know how to fund you and how to fund your communities. We want to be able to categorize you so that we can know how to treat you and how to justify treatment, or the harsh treatments, or the lack of sensitivity for harsh treatments. So then what happens now is you have a race of people, which is white, but then you also have a mixed people, which are mixed between white and Black, or white and African. And then you have the Africans that were here as well. So now that you have a mixed group of people, we have to figure out, what do we do with that mixed race, and how do we sustain our superiority as white Americans? And so what happened was they created the social construction of race, and they allowed using the laws against mankind, using the laws in their benefits to sustain their superiority. And the way that they did that was they came up with things like one drop blood, which is the one drop rule, they called it. So the one drop rule, or that was between 1/4 or up until 1/8 to 1/4% of your blood. If 1/4 to 1/8 to 1/4% of your blood was Black, then you were considered to be African American, or Black American, or African. But if you had less than that, 1/16 or anything less than 1/8, then you were considered to be white. So you had men and women, men specifically like Thomas Jefferson, who had children that were with his slaves, but they were born slaves because his wife was still a slave. He later freed them and let them loose, and they were able to escape. And when they grew up, they were considered to be white. Regardless of what the system said, they lived them to classify themselves as white. So the reason why we show you the social construction and the understanding of a social construction is because from one state to the next state, you could be white in this state, because in this state, they believe that if you had 1/8 of blood, you were considered to be black. But in the next state, it was 1/4. So if I had less than 1/4 in the next state, I was white. If I had more than 1/4, then I was black. And so from state to state, the percentage changed, which means the social construction was man-made to depict the race that you were. If you was a mixed race, we're going to depict and show you and push everybody that has mixed blood into one race and say that they're all black. But in times past, it was different. So they said, okay, well, how do we keep our control? They controlled it by, like I said, creating the one drop rule. That one drop rule actually came along in 1910 in the progressive era, because now that we're progressive and now that we're going to grow and we're going to develop, we want to know who's going to grow. We want to know who's going to develop. We want to know who and how to appropriate the fundings and allocate the money into the industries and into the communities, because that's how we stay dominant and that's how we stay segregated. Is by classification. So if we can classify you with the one drop rule, which was later eliminated, but then they came along also with the Racial Integrity Act, which means now marriages the same way. It became illegal. We don't want you to even intermarry anymore. In the 1920s, we don't want intermarriages, which was then overturned in 1967. So all this time, what we've seen in this society is separation by race, which is a social construction. So the truth of the matter is there is only one race, because 99% of all of our blood is exactly the same. 99% of your blood, whoever's watching, is just like mine. The only thing that makes us different is the 1% of your blood. So when I say that people say that there is truly no racism, they're true, because the ideal of race is not true. The ideal of race is not a fact. The only race that there is the human race. So the only construction and the only one that can ever construct a race is God himself, which is the divine construction of man. Outside of that, there was never, ever meant to be another construction. So that's why we called it a social construction, because now man is going to come and determine who's black, who's white, who's this and who's that. And then they're going to turn around and then take all the races and bring it down to about 4. You notice when you apply for a job, there's only about 4 races you can be. You're either black, white, you're Hispanic, Asian, or you're other. So whatever else you are, we've categorized you in this small category. Because if we can categorize you with the social construction of race, then we can control the appropriations of funding. We can control the communities and who lives in what communities. We can control how people are being promoted. We can control various things and interactions with individuals, because now you believe a certain thing about me because of the construction of who this race and this community has said that I am, and this society. So now you associate me with the people that you have given stereotypes to, because you've categorized me in order to control the race and in order to control the social interactions between men and women. So that's then how we get racism, which was the social construction that was created from our foundations. And so now those social constructions are the things that has to be removed. We have to understand that the only thing that connects us is our ethnicity. Our ethnicity of our story and the history of who you are and who you identify with, regardless of your mixedness and how mixed you may be. So at the end of the day, there is only one race, and that is the human race. So to be divided by race and everything that has divided our system and how we interact and all of the stereotypes that come along because of the race that I believe you are, because of everything that they told me about you. Stereotypes meaning that these are instances of things that are not necessarily true. but I believe it because that's what they taught me about your race. So now you have to live up to the stereotypes of your race when you meet another individual that's of the opposite race. It's already ingrained and imprinted into their mind what your race is like. So I'm going to prejudge you. Therefore, I have prejudices because it was already ingrained in my mind from my childhood regarding who you are. I'm going to discriminate against you. And the issue is I can't see that I'm doing it, which is why I can't see race-ism, because it's ingrained as an imprint that is in my mind because of the natural, the norms that the social construction of this economy has created. So that social construction of racism has entered into the fabric of our culture and in all of our systems, which is why we have systemic racism that white people cannot see. Many white people, not all. Which is why we have systemic racism that many blacks deny for the acceptance of for the acceptance of those who are in power and those who are leading. Or just the lack of their experience altogether, because the truth is everybody's experience is subjective, and you can't dictate what something is of a race. You can't say that there is no this, there is no racism, there is no that, just because you haven't experienced it, because a lot of other people have. Just because your subjective experience says that there is no race does not mean that there is no racism. Just because your subjective experience says that because you grew up in a certain area, you grew up in a wealthy family with two parents having education and money as a black individual, and you have not received or experienced racism. That does not mean that it does not exist. It just means that in your subjective experience, you have not experienced it yet. But there are hundreds and thousands and millions of other people that have. And so that very racism has been in the fabric of our culture since our inception. So my challenge to America is, who is going to lead us out of this social construction? What leader do we have that's going to run for office, that's running for office, that's going to lead us out of the social constructions of racism that we have today? That's going to heal the stereotypes and the mindsets that the economy has imprinted on whites, blacks, Latinos, and Asian Americans, so that we can be classified for the appropriations of fundings in accordance to where they are able to continue to keep their control over every community. Who is going to stand for us at this time? That is my challenge to America. Because as I see the office and as I see the candidates, what I see is people that are playing and joking and mocking and talking about each other, but nobody has taken this thing seriously. And if we don't take this thing seriously right now and understand that this is not a joking matter, this is not a playing matter, that this is not a matter for us to just sit and bicker back and forth, not understanding that at the end of the day, that what you see in this economy is from the current leadership and the culture of the current leadership that has divided everybody, dividing blacks once again, dividing whites from blacks once again, and causing us and turning us against each other, not only in the streets, but also in the parties. They're divided. Also in the government is divided. But that is because of your leadership. So my challenge to America is, who is going to bring us out of the social constructions of racism and heal this land? I thank you for coming to my KNC. This is my last one, my day 3. I hope you share this message because it needs to be heard amongst African Americans, Black Americans, and all minorities and all. So thank you again, and I hope that you stand with me through this time.